Hello and welcome everybody to today's orcharhino webinar with the title Orcharhino Proxies, the workhorses in an orcharhino infrastructure. So I will give you a quick introduction about what orcharhino is and then a practical demonstration of which role orcharhino proxies assume in such an orcharhino infrastructure. My name is Jan Bundesmann. I'm an orcharhino architect at ATIX. We're the company behind orcharhino, and I typically help customers in implementing their orcharhino infrastructures. And typically, those orcharhino proxies play an important role in such an infrastructure. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. They will appear somewhere on my screen and I will find an adequate moment to answer your questions. So there's one good spot for answering questions after the first introductory presentation, if you have any questions about orcharhino itself. And of course, later you can ask questions regarding our demonstration. So let's quickly go through the presentation. I hope you all see the slides here. What is orcharhino? Orcharhino is our data center automation tool, let's say. It provides a lot of features. We just roughly sketch what it actually does. Its main goal is to help you automating your data center. We believe that automation is a key component in improving your data center organization. It's less error prone than manual administration. Actually, it's less work than manual administration. And it also helps you basically to leverage new technologies into your data centers and to be faster eventually, which means you can reduce your mean time to release, let's say, which typically is a great advantage in terms of business logic, let's say. With orcharhino, we can, fulfill basically three different tasks. The first one is the deployment or the provisioning, actually, of hosts. We can provision different types of hosts. Typically, we're dealing with virtual machines, either on premises in some hypervisor environment or in some cloud. That orcharhino talks to the API of your hypervisor or your cloud provider, and that launches an instance there. That's a typical function, but it doesn't stop with that function. It also provides information for the installation of an operating system. We support the major Linux distributions as well as, for instance, Windows deployments. And beyond that, of course, you can use orcharhino to help you provisioning bare metal servers, because that's where it all originated from. Another big topic is that orcharhino can help you with configuration management. It acts as a front end for Puppet, Ansible, or SaltStack. So you can manage, let's talk in the Puppet language, you can manage which classes are assigned to which host and which parameters they will receive. In a similar fashion, it can manage which Ansible roles are assigned to your hosts and which variables they will receive. And the same for SaltStack. Here we're talking about states and pillars. Those are, the entities that we consider when talking about SaltStack. So typically you group hosts in host groups and assign like a class for managing the Apache, so for managing users. So you also can streamline your infrastructure using these configuration management tools. And as I said, for instance, initial configuration can be done using these tools. And the third big pillar, and I think it's one of the more complex ones, but also a really important one, is patch management. Orcarino can provide repositories for Linux distributions, can provide RPM packages, it can provide Debian packages, and make those packages, the repositories, available to your servers, to your hosts. But not only just like this, Orcarino can manage the repositories as staged repositories. So basically, what does this mean? You can have development, testing, and production hosts. And before making upgrades available for your production hosts, you can test them in your test environment. You can push new packages only to the dev environment, so only the dev hosts will receive the most recent packages. And even more, there is a concept called errata, which originally was, well, developed for rated enterprise Linux. Basically, an erratum is a kind of meta information that tells you which packages are affected by security vulnerabilities and which upgrades to basically to which version of that package would remedy this security vulnerability. This concept now exists also for other distributions. For instance, we ported it to the world of Debian and Ubuntu, so you can instantly see in the web UI of Orcarino if a host is affected by a security vulnerability, and you can patch those systems without like patching the whole machine. It really is a, let's say, surgical way of just patching those packages. Yeah, that's basically the idea behind the patch management. As I said, it's quite a complex stuff because there are several ways of dealing with your versions of your repositories, and eventually we would have to discuss a good scenario. Okay, so that's the basic functions. I already received a question. I will answer it shortly. Again, one more graph, how we think about release management, basically. So this is related to the patch management. As I said before, we have hosts that belong to certain life cycles. Yeah, that's basically how we summarize this. Orcarino cares for the whole life cycle of your servers. And we provide trainings, we provide support. If you buy Orcarino, you will get a support from our supporting team. We also have an engineering department that continues developing more features to Orcarino that incorporates bug fixes, also backports bug fixes, which is a very important feature. We test all the different Linux distributions, how they work with Orcarino. So we provide an agent and we make sure repositories can be used on your operating systems. Okay, so that's the quick, let's say, publicity block about Orcarino. The question I just received is what would be a workflow to update existing VM created by Orcarino? Example, VM provisioned by Orcarino. Now there's a need to add an RDM disk, for example, or another network interface. Question is if the workflow is to delete the VM, update the compute profile, and build new. So like destroying the virtual machine and rebuilding it. Or is there a way of doing this without deleting the virtual machine and using only Orcarino? So this is changed from time to time. Basically, it should be possible to attach, for instance, a new disk to a virtual machine, even through the UI. It depends a bit on which hypervisor you're using. I assume this would work for vSphere. I'm not sure about, for instance, libvirt or cloud providers. If I assign such a change through the UI, if this would be delivered to your hypervisor. Like in general, it should be possible to do this non-destructively. Not every hypervisor does understand what orcharhino sends to its API. Yeah, I hope this answers your question. We typically try to avoid having such scenarios because this is a basically non-standardized step we prefer. If, yeah, basically you only have one instance definition, and as you said, there is this destructive way. If you plan your infrastructure to work in a basically in an immutable way, so that you just can replace any machine by a new machine fulfilling the same purpose, that would deal very well with the destructive way. So I would prefer that solution. If you were planning from scratch, try it that way. Otherwise, yeah, this is something you really have to look at it. Okay, I hope I could answer your question. If there are more questions, post them. They will arrive with me with some delay, so don't be surprised if I don't see your questions immediately. Okay. I will go over to the next topic, to orcharhino proxies. And I will share my screen. Hope everything works fine. You should see now our orcharhino, let's say, interface. Just the first screen is just a list of hosts. Sorry. This is our demo system. It acts as a kind of a showcase to see which orcharhino distributions, Linux distributions we can deploy using orcharhino. So there are the major, let's say, enterprise-ready Linux distributions among them. And you also see there is Windows. So we want to talk about orcharhino proxies. We find them in the menu infrastructure, and then there is smart proxies. I already opened it in a second tab. Smart proxy is the nomenclature which comes from Foreman, the underlying open source project. We are distinguishing orcharhino, so the main server, and orcharhino proxies, which are separate instances, basically providing similar functions as the orcharhino itself. Here in this infrastructure, we have the orcharhino itself and one orcharhino proxy in an isolated network. That's why it's called, so this network is called demo DMZ, and the proxy there is the proxy.demodmz.atx. Okay, what they in most cases do is they care for several networks, and that's also how we set up this infrastructure. So there's a main network where orcharhino is responsible, and then there's this DMZ where the proxy is responsible. So they fulfill the same functions just within their own network. And then there is a bidirectional connection between the orcharhino and the orcharhino proxy to communicate with regards to these functions. We will have a closer look later what these functions are, but rough idea is that we can have these orcharhino proxies here. And to see, well, how that afflicts, for instance, host creation, let's have a look. I already prepared 2 more tabs. We deploy hosts using host groups. As I said, we prefer standardized hosts, so you will not care about too many details. The major information should be encoded in the host group, and in this demo case, we basically organize our host groups by distribution and as a kind of subgroup if the host shall be deployed in this isolated network. This is not a real case scenario, it's just easier for us for the showcase scenarios. So let's say we want to deploy an Alma Linux host 8. If I select the host group, all these values will be pre-filled with the values from the host group. And this is in the main network. So we see, for instance, that the content source is the orcharhino itself. The orcharhino itself also acts as the Puppet server here, as the Puppet certificate authority, as the endpoint for the OpenSCAD reports, as the salt master, and so on. While, so now we had the Alma Linux 8 as the host group. If it chose Alma Linux 8/demodim set, the host eventually will be built in this isolated network. So it's the same vCenter. It's just a different compute profile. So there is another VLAN attached to it. And then we see the content source now is the proxy, which means the proxy can provide packages. It can also act as a Puppet server, as an OpenSCAD report endpoint, as a salt master. Well, what else do we see? If we click here on the tab interfaces, we will see that this host will be deployed in one IPv4 net, 169. Well, if you have a look at the other one, we'll see it's the 168 net. And of course, they also use different domains, as you can see here. Yeah, if I now click, let's just do this for the host in the DemoDMZ network. If I click on Submit, orcharhino will create a virtual machine. Virtual machine will start and will then retrieve all the relevant information from the orcharhino proxy. And this basically tells you already which functions this orcharhino proxy can fulfill. It acts as a DHCP server here. It acts as a provider for all the PXE boot information in this scenario. So the kernel and the initial RAM disk image will be delivered from the orcharhino proxy. All the templates that are required for the creation of a new host are rendered on our orcharhino proxy. So what does this mean? The templates in this case is the kickstart file for the unattended installation of the Alma Linux host will be rendered on the orcharhino proxy. If that was a Ubuntu host, then of course it would be either preseed or autostart file, or for Debian just a preseed or auto-yast file is also possible. It will provide all the packages required for the installation. Unfortunately, we have kind of a hiccup, so the demo system does not perfectly work, so it does not provide all the packages currently, and we're figuring out why this happens. But for the moment, you see that this host is now being installed inside this isolated network. Okay, while this is being installed, I will go on going through my prepared tabs. So back to the Smart Proxies tab here. This is basically where we started. So we see we have these two instances, and then you see there is a column called features, and you see there is a list of some things. It's actually cut somewhere, so it's not a full list. But you see there are some similar names here, like Ansible appears on both lines, DHCP, and so on. Since the space is very limited, we can just open, so click on the name of the smart proxy that we want to see. And there's a real list of all the features. So what does this tell us? The smart proxy can act as as an Ansible control node. I just see a question. This video file cannot be played on the screen. So I hope it's not too many persons having the problem. If more of you encountered problems with the video stream, just so if anybody else is having problems with the video streams, post it as a question. In the meantime, I will continue. And there's one more question. I will just answer that for the moment. So the question is, so there's no problem having the primary Orcarino system feeding the Orcarino proxies, yet still feeding systems as well, correct? Exactly. So in many scenarios, you have like one central instance that is responsible for the majority of the hosts, but then you have some isolated spots like remote offices, remote locations, where like a smaller number of hosts is attached to the Orcarino proxies. And then we have other customers where actually no system is directly connected to the Orcarino, while all the hosts retrieve the information from the proxies. So exactly. So there's no problem having the primary Orcarino system feeding both Orcarino proxies and systems directly. Okay, thanks. No problems for someone with them using Chrome. Let's go back here to the features. As I said, the Orcarino proxy can act as an Ansible control node. It can provide containers. It acts as a DHCP proxy, which basically means it talks to the DHCP server if there is a new request that it should serve. In this case, it even is the DHCP server itself. Well, DynFlow means that it can run tasks on the hosts. DNS basically is for name resolution. HTTP boot is one way of providing boot information. Well, I think that most things are clear from the naming. So again, this is a similar feature set that is provided from the Orcarino proxies for the hosts. An important aspect, of course, is how content is provided. And this is also something which is new with Orcarino, beginning from Orcarino 6. Or it's not new, it has changed. Let's put it that way. So we have the tab content here. So beyond all those singular functions, we can have the content sync. We currently see here that one lifecycle environment client is synchronized to our Orcarino proxy. So basically, we define by lifecycle environment which content is synchronized to an Orcarino proxy. And we can define this here in this. If you click on the edit button, we will end up here in this edit mask for the Orcarino proxies. There's a tab lifecycle environments, and I could just click if I want, for instance, the development packages being synchronized to that particular Orcarino proxy. And depends a bit on how you design your life cycles, but this can be very helpful to minimize the required traffic, to provide, for instance, if you have several tenants and one tenant is attached to one Orcarino proxy while the other one is attached to another Orcarino proxy. So they really kind of physically only have access to their own repositories. So this is nothing new. This is something proxies can do from the beginning, but with the renewal of the underlying software called Pulp, there came one new function, which is the selection of the download policy. Basically, this describes how the Orcarino proxy downloads packages from the main Orcarino. This is currently set to streamed. This is basically making the Orcarino proxy act as a reverse proxy for the packages. So every time a host requests a package to be installed, the request ends at the proxy, and the proxy then in turn queries to download the package from the Orcarino, provides it to the host, and then deletes the local copy of the package. So this is really pass through without any caching. Other options are on demand, which is similar to the streamed one, only that a package that has been downloaded once will then be cached on the Orcarino proxy. So even less network traffic, only the actually required packages will be provided on the Orcarino proxy. And then we have immediate. What this means is that the full repositories inside your lifecycle environments will be completely synchronized to the Orcarino proxy. And the last one, inherit from repository, means that you can set on a repository level which download policy they should take, and then you can, for each repository, set one of those levels: on demand, immediate, or streamed. Might make sense in some occasions. Well, that's basically up to you. It depends a bit. Well, several questions that are involved in this topic. How much do you want to restrict traffic? How much is like traffic limitation an issue for you? Or how fast do you want to have your package? So in the streamed version, typically package requests take a little longer. In the on-demand scenario, the first package request would take a little longer, then afterwards it's quite fast. I think this should be quite clear. Okay, so that's basically how you can manage which content arrives on the Orcarino proxies. Next point is, of course, how does my infrastructure decide which instance, Orcarino or Orcarino proxy, is responsible for which feature? And we saw that there is this DHCP, for instance. Or another question would be, if I run a remote job on my server, which node acts as the control node? So is it Orcarino or the Orcarino proxies? This can be set in the menu point infrastructure subnets. We have two IPv4 subnets here. As you already see, the 68 and 69. They carry names as the domain. You see already there's a DHCP proxy set here. If I click on the name of the subnet, I even see more settings. There's a first page that will show now. This is the basic information for the DHCP server, for the network itself. And then we have this tab proxies here. And you see that for all those functions, we have to explicitly set that the proxy is responsible. So if you would set, basically we can have several proxies being accessible from the same network. In that case, we could have different settings here, but typically it's always the same proxy that is responsible for one network as a whole. And one more tab, which is important here, is this remote execution tab. Here again, we set the proxies that are responsible for carrying out remote execution calls to a host. And here it's not that you choose one proxy, but you can even select several proxies, as I just did here. This would mean that each time I want to schedule a remote execution job, the next responsible, or selected proxy will be chosen in a round-robin fashion. Okay, and well, one last thing, similar of course for the domains. For each domain, I have to set which proxy is responsible for the DNS server. So again, this does not mean that the proxy itself acts as a name server. It can mean that, but it can also just mean that it talks to the actual name server. For instance, if you have an Active Directory providing name resolution in your infrastructure, you can set up an Orcarino proxy to provide all the relevant information to that Active Directory. Okay, just one last demonstration here. We have one host here, which I prepared. I just want to show two quick things. First thing, this is residing in another Orcarino infrastructure, not our demo infrastructure, but the test infrastructure, because I said already there is a small hiccup with our demo system. What we can see here, well, fortunately we can see it at some point, the salt master is some proxy open test ATEX, so it's not attached directly to some Orcarino, but to some proxy. What can we see here? We can, of course, schedule remote jobs. We will not directly see what happens, but we can see. So again, we have two separate networks. We have the Orcarino residing in the main network, controlling the majority of the hosts, and having the proxy in the isolated network. And here all the commands run through our Orcarino proxy, and then we can just copy or paste some names. So let's do something like this. And this remote execution now would be proxied through our Orcarino proxy, as the name says. Yeah, I can just click on the output of my job. It's a bit slow, sorry for that. Yeah, and then I just see it's the output, the host name, and then the second command was IPA, so just showing the IP configuration. And if I'm actually logged in to this host, what can I see? I can see that I just hold a subscription manager repos. This just shows me where this host obtains its repositories from. Will show that all those repositories are from some proxy servers. And if I now install some package, this will be retrieved from this proxy server. And that's basically what I wanted to show. If you have more questions, feel free to post them. If you will have questions in the future, don't be afraid to reach out to us. You should find several ways of contacting us on our webpage. Probably already know us, so you can also send emails to us directly. Or if there is something else that I can show to you with regards to Orcarino proxies, I'm happy to continue. So since I already said there is a small lag, I will wait for 2 to 3 minutes for you to ask further questions. Okay, so there are no more questions. I can just quickly elaborate a bit on the first question we had today. I can click on the edit button if I have an already deployed host and if this is a virtual machine. And then I will end up in a math that is similar to the one I saw during host creation. And then I have the tab virtual machine. And I can change settings here. And at least last time I tried these changes I made here, like adding a second disk, also arrived at the hypervisor. Only that afterwards, of course, I have to perform additional steps, like adding the new disk to my volume group and growing the logical volume. These things are, of course, not done completely automatically. So you would have to find something like a playbook in Ansible or some scripts that would help you with these tasks. Also, the changing of the actual compute parameters might require a reboot. I'm not sure if this is always working out of the box and as a live patch. Okay, so with this, I want to thank you for your attention. I would be happy to hear from you in the future, and I hope you learned something new today. And I hope also that we see you when with the next Ocarina webinar, which will be announced soon. Goodbye.